You never really needed it anyway. My father's voice crackled over the phone, casual, as if he hadn't just confessed to draining my college savings. I stood frozen in my small apartment in Chicago, the city I had moved to for college, clutching my phone with a mix of disbelief and rage. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Relax, Laura," he said, as though I was overreacting. "What's done is done. No point in crying over spilled milk." "Laura, that's me. I'm 24, and I've spent the last 6 years juggling scholarships, part-time jobs, and saving every spare penny to fund my education. I had 1 year left to graduate with a degree in architecture, and that money was supposed to secure my future. Now it was gone. "How much is left?" I asked, dreading the answer. "None of it," he replied matter-of-factly. "I had some debts to take care of, but don't worry, you'll figure something out. You're smart like that." Smart like that. The audacity. He spoke as though his betrayal wasn't a betrayal at all, as though my hard work and sacrifices didn't matter. And he hadn't even paused to ask how this might affect me. "I see," I said, biting back tears. "That's my girl," he replied, mistaking my calm for acceptance. "You're always so practical. Just like your old man." Practical. That's what he thought I was. The irony of it made me want to laugh. Instead, I listened as he told me he had to go meet friends for drinks funded by my future. When the call ended, I sank into the worn chair by the window, staring blankly at the Chicago skyline. I'd come here with dreams of designing buildings that would change the world. Now, I couldn't even see a way to pay for my next semester. The next message came just minutes after the call ended. "Don't mention this to your mom or anyone else in the family. No need to cause drama," my dad had texted, as though he hadn't just upended my entire life. Of course, he didn't want anyone to know. Just like he hadn't wanted anyone to know about his string of bad decisions, his gambling debts, failed investments, and tendency to borrow money without ever repaying it. But I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. I opened my laptop and started compiling a list. It wasn't the first time I had to pick up the pieces of someone else's mess, but it was the first time I felt the weight of betrayal so acutely. Step 1. Documentation. Bank statements, proof of my deposits, copies of the scholarships I'd worked so hard to earn. Step 2. Research. Legal aid, financial aid options, part-time jobs, anything that could help me salvage what was left of my education. I'd been underestimated before. My father had always treated me like a backup plan. "Good thing you're pretty," he'd joke when I aced my exams, as if my achievements didn't matter. "You can always find a rich husband if college doesn't work out." But I wasn't about to let him define my future. By the end of the week, I'd pieced together the full extent of his betrayal. The account had once held nearly $38,000, money I'd earned through summer jobs, academic awards, and careful budgeting. He had drained it all in less than a month, making small withdrawals to avoid detection. When my roommate, Ava, walked into the apartment one evening, she found me surrounded by printouts and bank statements. "Laura, what the hell?" "Your dad did." "What dash?" she asked, reading over my shoulder. "He emptied the account," I said flatly. "But legally, it was still in both of our names. He had the right to do it." "That's theft," she exclaimed. "Not in the eyes of the law," I muttered, remembering how he'd manipulated me into keeping his name on the account when I was 17. I'd been too trusting back then, too eager to believe he had my best interests at heart. Ava shook her head. "So what now? You just let him get away with it." "No," I said, a determined edge creeping into my voice. "Not this time." The next few days felt like a blur of anger and determination. My father kept texting me, his messages dripping with condescension. "Don't stress about it so much, Laura. Maybe this is a sign to take a break from school. Look, I know some people who can get you a modeling gig. Better money than that architecture degree anyway." Every message was a reminder of how little he valued my hard work, my independence, or my dreams. To him, I was just a resource to exploit, a backup plan for his bad choices. I couldn't do this alone. The first call I made was to my grandmother. She had always been my biggest supporter, cheering me on every step of the way through school. When I told her the full story, her reaction was immediate. "That man," she fumed over the phone, "has been getting away with this nonsense for too long. Stealing from his own daughter? Laura, we need to handle this as a family." By the next evening, my grandmother had arranged an emergency family meeting via video call. She was there, along with my mom and my Aunt Rachel, who happened to be a lawyer. Sitting in front of the screen, I laid out everything: bank statements, screenshots of texts, proof of my savings, and even the casual way he dismissed my future over the phone. My mom's hands trembled as she read through the messages. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He told me you wanted to take a break from school, that you were homesick and thinking about moving back." Of course, he had. My father had always been good at spinning stories to suit his needs. He twisted my achievements into reflections of himself, and now tried to make his betrayal seem like a practical decision. "I've been documenting everything," I said. "Every withdrawal, every call, every message. I'm not letting him get away with this." Aunt Rachel leaned forward, her lawyerly instincts kicking in. "The account issue is tricky since he was a co-signer, but there may be other ways to hold him accountable. Has he made any promises in writing about repaying the money?" I scrolled through my phone and found a few text messages where he'd casually mentioned paying me back someday. "That's a start," Rachel said. "Not legally binding, but it gives us leverage." "What do we do next?" I asked. Rachel exchanged a look with my grandmother. "First, we confront him as a family. Then we put together a formal demand letter. If he doesn't cooperate, we take legal action." "That man has underestimated you for too long," my grandmother added, her voice firm. "He thinks he can take advantage of you because you're young. Time to show him how wrong he is." The plan came together quickly. My grandmother, the only person my father had ever seemed remotely afraid of, volunteered to confront him first. "I'll call him," she said during our meeting. "He needs to know the family is aware of what he's done, and that we won't stand for it." When she called him the next morning, I imagined the scene vividly: my father, trying to charm his way out of accountability, and my grandmother, cutting through his excuses with the precision of a blade. That evening, she sent me an email. "I spoke to him. He's nervous, Laura. Very nervous. I think he knows he's in trouble." The next step was Rachel's demand letter. It was sharp, concise, and left no room for misinterpretation. A full accounting of the $38,000 he had taken. A clear timeline for repayment. The consequences if he failed to comply, including potential legal action. When the letter arrived at his house via certified mail, his reaction was immediate. He called me, his voice bouncing between anger and desperation. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Laura," he said. "It's just money. Family is more important than money." "Family?" I shot back. "You mean the family you lied to and stole from? That family?" There was silence on the other end of the line, but I wasn't done. "From now on, everything goes through Aunt Rachel. She's handling this." "Rachel? Why is she involved?" "She's making this into a legal thing. You don't need a lawyer. You need to calm down." "I needed my college fund, Dad. You made this a legal thing." The next few days were a flurry of text and calls. He vacillated between guilt trips, "You're my daughter. Don't you love me?" and attempts to shift the blame. "I was going to pay it back. You're acting like I did this out of spite." But I forwarded every message to Aunt Rachel without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper. The final straw came when he showed up at my grandmother's house, uninvited and clearly panicked. She didn't even let him step inside. "How dare you?" she said, her voice ringing out loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Stealing from your own daughter? Have you no shame?" "Mother, please," he tried to plead. "This is a family matter." "Exactly," she snapped. "And you've betrayed your family. Now leave before I call the police." He left, but the messages continued. "Your grandmother has turned you against me," one text read. "I'm your father. You owe me respect after everything I've done for you." I thought about everything he had done for me, how he discouraged my academic ambitions, borrowed my savings as a child, and treated my success as his personal safety net. I wasn't falling for it anymore. With my grandmother and Aunt Rachel on my side, the tides were finally starting to shift. My father, who had always counted on manipulating me and hiding behind family loyalty, now found himself cornered. The demand letter had clearly shaken him, but he wasn't ready to cooperate just yet. Instead, he resorted to his usual tricks: denial, guilt, and manipulation. "You can't sue your own father," he spat at me over the phone one evening. "Watch me," I replied before hanging up. The next day, Aunt Rachel forwarded me a new discovery. My father had recently bought a brand new car and posted vacation photos on social media. For a man who was claiming poverty, he was doing a terrible job of hiding his spending. "He's not broke," Rachel said during one of our calls. "He's just good at hiding assets, but not good enough." Meanwhile, my mom, emboldened by the family's newfound resolve, finally filed for divorce. She had hesitated for years, but now the financial infidelity and years of betrayal had pushed her to take action. During the first hearing, his pattern of stealing from me came up, and the judge was appalled. "You drained your daughter's college fund to pay off personal debts?" the judge asked incredulously. "I was going to pay it back," my father protested weakly. "With what money?" the judge shot back. "You've been unemployed for years, and these statements show no stable income." His carefully constructed image of a fun-loving, generous father was crumbling fast. Back in Chicago, I started piecing my life back together. The university's financial aid office was surprisingly helpful once they understood the situation. They helped me secure emergency funding and work out a payment plan for my final year. My grandmother insisted on covering some of the costs, even though I was hesitant to accept. "Unlike your father," she said firmly, "I understand the value of education and of keeping promises." Despite his claims of being unable to repay me, my father's lies kept unraveling. Aunt Rachel discovered he was still maintaining a country club membership and had been making payments on a condo in a different city. She updated the demand letter to include these findings, tightening the legal pressure. His texts became more desperate. "You're ruining my life. My own daughter turning against me like this. I raised you better than this. Why can't you just forgive me?" Each message only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. The final blow came when he tried to turn my younger cousins against me, claiming I was trying to bankrupt him out of spite. Instead, they shared screenshots of his messages with me, adding more fuel to my growing file of evidence. "Remember when Uncle Greg told us our college funds were safe with him?" my cousin Mia wrote. "Guess we know what that meant now." Aunt Rachel stepped in to help them secure their accounts before he could do the same to them. Piece by piece, his web of financial abuse was being dismantled. The fallout was monumental. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years began reaching out, horrified at what my father had done. My Aunt Patricia, his sister, shared her own stories of betrayal. "He borrowed money from my kids' birthday funds," she admitted during a family call. "I kept forgiving him because he was family. But this? Stealing from his own daughter's education? That's a new low." With every new revelation, his reputation unraveled further. His lies and schemes, once carefully hidden behind charm and family loyalty, were exposed for everyone to see. My mother, now fully committed to her divorce, uncovered even more during the proceedings. He had been taking out loans in her name, hiding money in offshore accounts, and even trying to remortgage their house without her knowledge. "He's been treating the family like his personal ATM," she said during one of our calls. And we all just kept making excuses for him. My grandmother decided to hold another family meeting, this time without him present. Relatives came forward with stories of loans never repaid, promises broken, and trust betrayed. "He's always counted on family loyalty to shield him from the consequences," Aunt Rachel observed. "It's time we show him that loyalty goes both ways." The legal and financial consequences hit my father like a domino effect. My mother's divorce attorney uncovered hidden assets, leading to a much larger settlement than he'd anticipated. Aunt Rachel's relentless legal pressure forced him into agreeing to a repayment plan for the stolen funds, this time with interest. Even his friends, the ones he convinced to invest in his failed ventures, began demanding answers. His once carefully curated facade of the fun-loving, generous dad had crumbled completely. Despite everything, my father still tried to manipulate me. "You're still my daughter," he wrote in one text. "Family forgives each other. Why can't you just move on?" But I had moved on. Through my grandmother's connections, I secured a part-time job that allowed me to finish my final year of school. My professors, understanding my situation, helped me arrange a flexible schedule. Every small victory felt like a step further from his influence, a step toward reclaiming the future I'd fought so hard for. Even the family, once complicit in enabling his behavior, rallied behind me. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had once excused his actions now stood firmly against him. My Aunt Patricia started a family group chat to track his latest schemes. "He tried to convince my son to co-sign a car loan," she reported one day. "Said it would help build his credit." Sound familiar? It did. He tried the same tactic with me when I was 18, but my grandmother had intercepted it back then. Now, the family was no longer falling for his tricks. Watching his world shrink as mine expanded didn't bring me satisfaction, just validation. Every monthly payment he was forced to make, every consequence he faced, was proof of something I had always known. He was capable of doing the right thing. He just never thought he had to. By the time I graduated, my father's world had all but collapsed. His reputation within the family was irreparable, his finances were under constant scrutiny, and the legal repayment plan Aunt Rachel had secured ensured that he couldn't escape accountability. At my graduation, the absence of my father was a relief. My grandmother and Aunt Rachel sat proudly in the audience, cheering as I walked across the stage to accept my diploma. Later, at the small celebration my grandmother hosted, family and friends came together to honor not just my academic achievement, but the journey I'd taken to reclaim my life. "Your father called me yesterday," my mom said quietly as we sat together during the party. "He wanted me to talk to you about dropping the repayment plan. Said he'd learned his lesson." I laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Has he really learned anything, though?" "No," she admitted with a sigh. "He's learned he can't manipulate you anymore." That's not the same as learning a lesson. The repayment plan remained in place, with monthly payments directly deducted from his paycheck. It had forced him to finally get a steady job, something he hadn't held in years, and the extravagant lifestyle he'd once flaunted was no longer sustainable. He still tried to contact me, sending occasional emails or texts dripping with self-pity. The latest one read, "It's not fair. I'm your father. You're supposed to love me unconditionally." I didn't reply. Instead, I pinned the email to the bulletin board in my new office in downtown Chicago, alongside my diploma and a photo of my grandmother and me. They were symbols of everything I had achieved, despite him. Meanwhile, my career was taking off. The same determination and attention to detail that had helped me survive my father's betrayal now propelled me forward. I landed a job at a top architecture firm in Chicago, and every success felt sweeter knowing I'd earned it entirely on my own terms. 2 years later, my father was still making his monthly payments. He tried multiple schemes to reduce or delay them, but Aunt Rachel's legal oversight left him with no room to maneuver. At a family gathering back home, my cousin Mia shared her own victory. She graduated college debt-free, her fund protected thanks to Aunt Rachel's advice. "Do you know what Uncle Greg said when I told him?" Mia laughed. "He said I should thank you for overreacting about your fund. Said it helped him learn an important lesson." "Did he, though?" I asked, shaking my head. "He learned not to mess with family members who have lawyers," Aunt Rachel interjected with a smirk. "That's about it." As for me, I no longer felt the sting of betrayal when I thought about my father. His actions had been a catalyst for my growth, forcing me to rely on my strength and the support of those who truly cared about me. At the firm's annual charity gala, I was asked to give a speech about persistence and overcoming obstacles. I didn't mention my father directly, but I shared the moment I learned my college fund was gone, not as a story of loss, but as a story of resilience. Sometimes, I told the audience, the people who should support you the most become the obstacles you need to overcome. Their underestimation becomes your motivation. My father saw the speech online. Someone had shared it in the family group chat he'd been excluded from. His response came through my grandmother. "She's still angry," he complained to her, using my mistake to get attention. "No," she told him, "she's successful, using her strength to help others. There's a difference." The final repayment arrived on a warm Tuesday afternoon. It was the last installment of the money he had stolen from me, and with it came a note. "Now can we be family again?" I filed the receipt with all my other documents, the bank statements, the texts, the screenshots of his schemes, not because I needed them anymore, but as a reminder of how far I had come. My mother, now happily remarried, put it best during one of our calls. "He thought taking your money would keep you dependent on him," she said. "Instead, it set you free." She was right. Every attempt he'd made to hold me back had pushed me forward instead. His greatest punishment wasn't the repayment plan or the family's disapproval. It was watching me succeed without him, beyond him, and despite him. As I stood in my office, gazing at the Chicago skyline I'd once dreamed of, I felt not anger, but peace. My future was mine, untethered from his influence. And for the first time, I felt truly free.